The shift you didn't know you needed. Introduction. You might not realize it yet, but something inside you is quietly asking for a change, a shift, so profound that it can't be ignored anymore. Maybe you feel it as a restless ache, a whisper in the back of your mind, or a tiredness that no amount of busyness can fix. This book isn't about adding more to your to-do list or chasing a new goal. It's about peeling back the layers of who you've been told to be and meeting the truest, most powerful version of yourself beneath it all. You'll discover that the battles you fight are not with the world, but inside your own mind and heart, where old stories, fears, and silenced truths have taken root. Together, we'll navigate the shadows of doubt and suppression. Embrace the courage it takes to come home to yourself and unlock a kind of freedom you didn't know was possible. A freedom born not from changing your circumstances, but from shifting your relationship with them. This is the shift you didn't know you needed, a journey inward that will transform how you see yourself, your life, and your future. If you're ready to stop surviving and start truly living, this is your invitation. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Voice Inside Your Head. It was 7:08 a.m. when Lisa pulled into the grocery store parking lot and just sat there engine off, hands clenched around the steering wheel, radio playing low, and her heart beating like something was wrong, though nothing was. Or rather, everything was. The morning had been like most others. She woke up before her alarm, checked her phone out of habit, scrolled through people's highlight reels while she lay under the weight of her own unfinished life, checked her kid's lunchbox with the quiet ache of routine, and drove to the store not because she needed anything urgently, but because it gave her something to do. A reason to leave the house, a place to be. But in that car, with the world moving around her, she heard that voice. Not out loud, but inside her chest, like it had always lived there. You're behind. You should have figured it out by now. Look at her, she's doing better. Your excuse? It was relentless, rehearsed, and oddly convincing. And it wasn't the first time. If you're honest, you've heard that voice too. Maybe yours speaks in guilt, or perfectionism, or that quiet sense of being fundamentally not enough, no matter how hard you try. It sounds like you, but harsher, smarter, more certain. It critiques your pauses, second-guesses your dreams, and reminds you daily that someone out there is living the life you should have. But here's what most people never learn. That voice isn't truth, it's programming. It's the echo of every time you were told to sit down, be quiet, not make a fuss. It's the rules you inherited, the beliefs you didn't choose, the judgments disguised as concern. Somewhere between childhood and right now, you were trained to internalize the world's doubts and then repeat them to yourself. That voice is a survival mechanism dressed in authority. It's developed to keep you safe, acceptable, and successful in a system that thrives on insecurity. But in doing so, it made you small. It's made you exhausted. And maybe like Lisa you. Now find yourself living a life that looks okay from the outside, but feels like a performance you didn't audition for. The shift you didn't know you needed is this. You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. You are not your thoughts. You are the space in which they arise. This isn't spiritual fluff, it's neuroscience. It's psychology. It's truth. When you can observe a thought instead of believing it, you reclaim authorship. You create space between reaction and reality. That space is everything. That space is where freedom lives. Lisa didn't fix her life in that parking lot, but for the first time, she challenged the voice. She whispered not out loud, but inwardly, who says I'm behind? Who decides what enough looks like? And just like that, the spell cracked. Flicker of light came through. She still had bills to pay, kids to raise, questions without answers. But now, she also had a thread of awareness, a thread she could follow, a thread you can follow. You don't kill the inner critic by force, you starve it of obedience. Notice it, you name it. You speak to it like you'd speak to a scared child who learned to be cruel because no one taught them better. And you begin again, every day, with gentleness and grit. Let that voice talk, but don't let it lead. You've let it narrate your life long enough. Now it's your turn. So here's your quiet revolution. The next time you hear you're not enough, respond not with fear, but with curiosity. Ask, says who? Ask, is that even mine? Ask, what would I believe if I didn't believe that? This is where transformation begins, not in shouting over your doubts, but in daring to doubt your doubts. The voice won't go away. Overnight, that's not the goal. The goal is to remember that you get to choose what voice you follow. And maybe that small whisper you are already enough starts to grow louder, stronger, truer. The world may never quiet down. You can. Chapter 2. The Death by 1,000 Suppressions. Maya was the kind of woman everyone counted on, always composed, always pleasant, always the one who remembered birthdays and brought snacks to the meeting, the friend who said no worries. When she meant I'm exhausted, the daughter who smiled through family dinners, even when she felt like she was sinking. But on a random Thursday night, standing barefoot in the kitchen with a bag of groceries in her hand and no strength to put them away, something in her cracked. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was a whisper that came from somewhere deep. I can't keep doing this. It wasn't about the groceries or the dinner or even the day. It was about the life she had built by slowly shrinking. A life shaped by silence, by guilt, by years of nodding when she wanted to scream, apologizing when she should have demanded, bending so far for others that she forgot she had a spine of her own. That's how it happens, doesn't it? Not all at once, but piece by piece, you dim your light a little here to keep the peace. You swallow your truth a little there to avoid the fight. You say I'm fine when you're actually unraveling. And slowly, invisibly, you disappear into the version of yourself that hurts the least people and honors the least truth. It's a quiet erosion. This death by 1,000 suppressions, not a sharp fall, but a slow burial of your needs, your fire, your voice. We've been taught that self-sacrifice is noble, that silence is strength, that to be easygoing is to be lovable, but the cost of that conditioning is often a life where your own essence becomes the one thing you never listen to. And your body knows. It always knows. That tightness in your throat, that pressure in your chest, that chronic fatigue, no amount of sleep fixes. They're not just symptoms, they're signals. It's the body keeps score of every truth you never spoke, every boundary you never held, every time you convinced yourself you were overreacting just to survive the moment. And yet, we normalize it. We call it stress, we call it adulthood, we call it being busy. But the truth is, many of us are not busy, we're buried. Buried under years of emotional censorship and inner editing, trained to believe that our pain is inconvenient, our needs are selfish, our voice is too much. But here's the shift you didn't know you needed. Your silence is not strength if it costs you your soul. And your worth is not measured by how little space you take up in other people's lives. You weren't born to be agreeable, you were born to be authentic. There's a difference. And authenticity isn't about being loud or rebellious. It's about being honest. It's about letting your no mean no, your yes mean yes. Your tears fall when they need to, your laughter ring when it wants to. It's about giving yourself permission to feel even when it's messy, even when it's inconvenient. Because you can't heal what you won't admit, and you can't rise while pretending you're not breaking. Maya didn't change everything that night in the kitchen, but she did something even more powerful. She let the truth in. She sat on the floor, surrounded by produce and tears, and whispered to herself, for the first time in years, I matter too. And that was the beginning not of a breakdown, but of a becoming. You don't need to blow up your life to find yourself. You just need to stop disappearing inside it. Start small. Say what you mean. Feel what you feel. Let discomfort rise. Without numbing it, you were not designed to live beneath your own truth. You were built to carry light, but not if you're constantly dimming it to fit someone else's room. So today, in your own way, I invite you to defy the silence. Speak the thing. Write the thing. Cry the thing. Let something real rise to the surface, even if it shakes. You are not too much. You're not a burden. You're not dramatic for feeling deeply. You are a human being who's been edited for far too long. And maybe, just maybe, the real you is what the world needs most. So let me ask you, from one truth teller to another, what's one part of yourself you've buried him? Are you ready to dig it up and let it breathe? Chapter 3. When hustle becomes a hiding place. Marcus used to believe that if he just worked hard enough, long enough, relentlessly enough, the anxiety would quiet down. The shame would loosen its grip, and maybe, just maybe, he'd finally feel like he mattered. So he chased degrees, promotions, side hustles, certifications, and Instagram-worthy productivity. Until one night at 11:47 p.m., standing in his kitchen, with a laptop in one hand and cold coffee in the other, his body buzzing from too much caffeine, into little rest, he realized something terrifying. Even when he won, he didn't feel worthy, just temporarily relieved. Like a man who outran a monster only to find it waiting again the next morning. That's when it hit him. His hustle wasn't just about ambition, it was about avoidance. And if we're honest, many of us are doing the same, disguising our emotional exhaustion as drive. Our disconnection is discipline, our pain is productivity. In a culture that worships the grind, we're taught to equate worth with output, to outrun our feelings by drowning them in to-do lists. To numb the ache with busyness because slowing down feels like failure. But the deeper truth is this: hustle is not always a dream, it's often a defense. It's a socially acceptable way to avoid facing the parts of ourselves we don't want to sit with, the loneliness, grief, the belief that we are only as good as what we produce. It's the place we go to feel powerful when we feel powerless, to feel in control when life inside feels chaotic. But eventually, hustle stops being fuel and starts being a mask, and the cost is steep. Relationships fade, creativity dries up, your health whispers louder each day, and your soul quietly wonders if it's been forgotten. The shift you didn't know you needed is not to hustle harder, to pause longer, to ask yourself, what am I running from? Who am I without my busyness? What am I afraid will catch up to me if I stop? And that's where the discomfort lives, because the moment you slow down, all the suppressed things come forward. But they're not there to punish you. They're there to be heard. They're the parts of you asking for your presence, not your productivity. You don't have to abandon your ambition, you just have to stop letting it be your identity. You can want success and still rest. You can build something great without building it on top of your own depletion. True power isn't frantic hides focused. It's not about how many hours you work, but how aligned your work feels with who you are. Hustle should be a tool, not a hiding place. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't the next big project. It's sitting quietly with yourself and saying, I no longer need to earn my worth. I already am. Marcus didn't quit his job or burn everything down. Instead, he relearned how to feel again, how to rest without guilt, how to create from wholeness instead of lack. And you can too, because your life wasn't meant to be an endless sprint. It was meant to be fully lived from a place of being, not just doing. So the next time the world tries to sell you speed as value, ask yourself this: what part of me? Am I trying to outrun into what might happen if I finally let it catch me? Chapter 4. What they never taught you about stillness. On a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the world feels paused and you can hear the refrigerator hum like a meditation bell, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, thumb frozen, over the Instagram icon, not because he wanted to scroll, but because he didn't know how to not scroll. There was no urgency, no message waiting, no task to complete, just silence. And that silence made his skin itch. He looked around the room he'd lived in for 3 years, the books he hadn't finished, the candles gathering dust, the journal untouched since New Year's. Something about that moment, just him and the quiet, felt almost unbearable, like he was being watched by his own soul, and he didn't know what to say. We've been taught 1,000 things: how to win, how to grind, how to multitask, how to market ourselves, how to build, climb, hustle, perfect. But almost no one teaches us how to be still. Not physically still, spiritually. Still, the kind of stillness that feels like standing in the middle of yourself without needing to perform or produce. And because no one taught us how, we mistake stillness for laziness, boredom, awkwardness, even danger. So we fill the space with noise, with motion, with screens, with snacks, with endless to-dos. We chase busyness like it's a badge of purpose. But here's what no one told us. Stillness isn't the absence of movement. It's the presence of meaning. It's not passive, it's powerful. It's the place where you meet the parts of yourself that can't speak over the noise. And yes, at first it feels terrifying, because the minute things get quiet, the things you've been avoiding start to speak. Old grief, unanswered questions, shame you buried beneath goals. But that discomfort isn't proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're getting close to something real. The shift you didn't know you needed is this. Your healing isn't in doing more, it's in feeling what you've been running from, and you can only do that in stillness. Stillness is where your nervous system softens, where your breath drops back into your belly, where your intuition starts whispering the truth. It's where you realize the answers aren't out there, they're in here. But they've been drowned out by your addiction to motion. Because yes, motion can be an addiction. Constant doing is often just elegant avoidance. We say we're chasing goals, but sometimes we're just sprinting away from the stillness that would force us to feel. And if that feels too real, too raw, that's okay. You were never taught how to sit with yourself, to listen without fixing, to be present without distracting. You weren't taught that rest is sacred, that being is enough, that silence is a form of prayer. But it's never too late to learn. Start small. Turn off the noise for 10 minutes. Sit on the floor. Put your hand on your chest. The parts of you that feel tight. Let the thoughts pass through like clouds. Don't grab them. Don't judge them. Just notice. This isn't about doing meditation perfectly. It's about giving yourself permission to exist without performance. To be with yourself the way you wish someone had been with you. Gently. Openly. Fully. And yes, your mind will resist at first. It'll try to drag you back into stimulation. That's okay too. Let the resistance be there, but don't follow. You're rewiring a nervous system that was trained to fear silence. But over time, stillness becomes a friend. A sacred space. A portal to the truest you. Because in stillness, something amazing happens. You begin to hear your real voice, not the voice of fear, pressure, or performance, but the quiet knowing that lives beneath it all. The voice that says, you are enough, even here, especially. Here. So the next time life gives you a pause, don't fill it. Don't escape it. Enter it. Let the quiet open you. Let the stillness teach you. Because the truth is, stillness doesn't mean nothing's happening. It means everything real. Finally, Ken. Chapter 5. Emotional Orphans and the Wounds We Normalize. When Elijah was 9, he won second place in the school science fair and came home grinning, holding his hand-painted solar system like a trophy, eager to show his father who glanced up from the TV, just long enough to say, second place. So who beat you? And then turned back to the game? That was it. No, I'm proud of you. No hug, no smile. Just a question that felt like a knife disguised as curiosity. Elijah didn't cry. He just nodded, placed the project on the kitchen table, and said he was going to play outside. But something in him shifted that day. Something small and invisibler. Quiet severing between what he felt and what he showed. Between who he was and who he thought he had to become. That's what happens when you grow up emotionally orphaned, not always by abandonment or cruelty, but by absence, by neglect, by being surrounded by people who never learned how to hold space for your feelings because no one ever held space for theirs. You learn not to need, not to feel too deeply, not to ask for more than others are capable of giving. And that silent wound becomes your blueprint. You learn to suppress your sadness so you're not seen as too sensitive to hide your joy. So no one thinks you're arrogant, to bury your anger so you're not called ungrateful. You learn to read rooms instead of reading yourself. The worst part? You grow up thinking this is normal, that emotional starvation is just life, that love always feels slightly out of reach, that your worth depends on how little you ask for. And one day, you're 30-something, sitting in a relationship, a job, a body, wondering why you feel invisible even when you're surrounded by people, why nothing is ever quite enough, why the emptiness shows up like clockwork after every win, every date, every temporary high. The truth. You didn't just inherit your eye color or your last name. You inherited unspoken pain, modeled behavior, invisible patterns. It just means you've been surviving in a world that taught you how to numb instead of feel. You were never too much. They were just emotionally underfed. And now, the shift you didn't know you needed? Stop trying to get closure from people who are still emotionally unavailable. Stop twisting yourself into contortions hoping someone will give you the love they never learned to give themselves. Start giving it to you. Start reparenting the child inside you who didn't need perfect parents, just present ones. Start asking, what did I need that I never got? And then start practicing that love in the mirror. Maybe it's gentleness. Maybe it's consistency. Maybe it's finally allowing yourself to cry without shame, to celebrate without dimming, to speak without editing. Emotional orphans don't heal by blaming the past. They heal by choosing to become the kind of presence they always needed. That's not weakness, it's power, because you are the cycle breaker now. The pattern disruptor. The soul brave enough to feel what generations suppressed. Don't have to carry the emotional debts of your lineage. You can choose to feel, to express, to connect. And yes, it will be awkward. It will feel foreign, like learning to walk barefoot after years in heavy boots. But this is how you return home to yourself slowly, softly, boldly. So let me ask, you this not as a coach or author, but as a fellow traveler. What feelings have you normalized that were never meant to be permanent? And what kind of love are you finally ready to stop waiting for and start giving yourself? Chapter 6. Breaking up with who you thought you had to be. I remember the moment Sarah finally realized she was living a life that wasn't hers, like the sudden crack of a window breaking in the dead of night, startling, unavoidable, and full of sharp edges. For years, she had played the role expected of her, the dutiful daughter, the overachiever, the person everyone could count on, but deep down, something was dying quietly inside. At family dinners, she smiled while her heart screamed for freedom. At work, she chased promotions that felt more like chains than keys. In her own mind, she rehearsed the perfect answers and concealed the messy, confusing questions that never made it to the surface. She was married to a version of herself that looked good on paper but didn't breathe, didn't dream, didn't sing. And then one night, she caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring. Back a stranger, shaped by years of expectations, fears, and compromises. Breaking up with who you thought you had to be is one of the most profound and painful shifts you'll ever face, because it's not just about changing habits or goals. It's about mourning the loss of a self you once believed in, even if it never truly fit. This chapter of your life asks you to question everything you were taught about success, love, and worthiness, the invisible scripts that tell you to stay small, to be nice, to hustle endlessly until you're exhausted, but accepted. But here's the hard truth. The person you're supposed to be is often a mirage built to keep you safe from rejection, failure, and loneliness. You learn to mold yourself into an ideal so well that the real you got lost in the process. Now, that loss whispers beneath your surface in moments of exhaustion, emptiness, and restless dissatisfaction. The shift you didn't know you needed is this: to break up with your old self, not with bitterness, but with compassion, and to fall in love with the wild, messy, radiant you who's been waiting all along. It's a grief and a rebirth wrapped in one, like shedding a skin that no longer serves your growth. This process demands courage to face the discomfort of not knowing, the vulnerability of saying no to people and expectations that don't nourish your soul, and the radical act of choosing yourself over approval. It means forgiving yourself for the years spent pretending and embracing the freedom that comes with authenticity. When Sarah finally took that leap, choosing truth over performance, she felt both terrified and alive for the first time in a long while. The voices that once said, "You have to be this way to be loved," grew quieter as her own voice grew stronger, clearer, and more compassionate. Breaking up with who you thought you had to be is less about abandonment and more about reclamation. The reclamation of your dreams, your desires, your sacred yeses and nos. It's the brave step of saying, "I am enough as I am, even if I don't fit your mold." So here's your invitation. What parts of your old self are you ready to say goodbye to? What expectations are you willing to release in order to make space for who you truly are? This isn't easy. It may feel like losing a lover or a lifelong friend. But it's also the gateway to finding yourself whole, unshackled, and radiant. Because the truth is, the version of you that's been waiting beneath all the shoulds is not only ready to be seen, it's desperate for you to remember that you were never meant to fit in a box. The real you, she's waiting with open arms. So I ask you, are you ready to break up with who you thought you had to be and say yes to the freedom of becoming who you really are? Chapter 8. The Lie of I'm Fine and the Truth Beneath. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Mark's friend called him after weeks of silence. When asked how he was, Mark's automatic reply came without hesitation. I'm fine. But inside, Mark felt anything but fine. His chest was tight with anxiety. His mind a tangled mess of what-ifs, and his smile barely a mask hiding a storm of loneliness. That two-word phrase, I'm fine, is one of the most common lies we tell ourselves and others. A reflex born not of cruelty, but of fear of vulnerability, rejection, and burdening others with our raw, messy truths. If we say it to keep the peace, to avoid awkward questions, or simply because we don't yet know how to express the ache beneath the surface. Yet each time we push down our authentic feelings, we widen the gap between who we are and who we pretend to be, until the weight of that gap crushes us slowly from the inside out. The truth beneath the lie of I'm fine is often an unspoken cry for connection, understanding, or even just permission to be imperfect. We live in a culture that celebrates strength as stoicism, where emotions are boxed away. And admitting struggle can feel like weakness, so we learn early on that fine is the safest answer. But what if the real strength is in breaking the silence? In telling the truth, not just to others, but to ourselves. Emotional honesty is a radical act of self-love, a reclamation of our humanity, and the first step toward healing the fractures inside. When Mark finally allowed himself to drop the facade, he discovered something surprising: not judgment, but compassion; not isolation, but connection; not weakness, but courage. Because vulnerability is not a crack in our armor, it's the doorway through which light enters. The shift you didn't know you needed is this. The next time you say, I'm fine, pause and ask yourself, what am I really feeling right now? And who can I trust enough to share that with? This simple practice cracks open the cage we often build around our emotions, reminding us that beneath every lie of I'm fine is a truth waiting to be set free, and that truth is the key to living fully alive, deeply connected, and unshakably human. So, what would happen if you stopped hiding behind I'm fine and started showing up exactly as you are? Chapter 9. Permission to Fall Apart and Why You Must. There was a moment when Maya stood alone in her kitchen late at night. The house finally silent except for the sound of her own breath and the tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in months, maybe years. Her body was tense, her mind a tangled storm of exhaustion, shame, and a voice telling her to keep it together, to stay strong, to don't let them see you break. But something inside her cracked a fracture. She had tried to ignore, and with it came a raw, trembling surrender that felt terrifying and strangely freeing. Falling apart isn't a failure. It's the doorway back to yourself, in a culture that prizes control, toughness, and the illusion of unshakable strength. Admitting you're unraveling feels like defeat. But what if it's the most courageous act you could ever do? What if permission to fall apart is not a sign of weakness, but the first step to true wholeness? We spend so much time building masks, stuffing grief into closets, silencing anger and numbing pain, believing that to stay strong means never showing the cracks. Yet every human heart is designed to break open, to release, to purge, and to heal. Suppression steals your vitality and steals your truth. It drains the well of your soul until you forget how to flow freely. When you give yourself permission to fall apart, you're not falling into chaos. You're breaking open the chrysalis that keeps you trapped in survival mode. You're allowing your grief, your anger, your fear, your heartbreak to breathe and be seen. Because unexpressed pain becomes poison, and only by naming it can you transform it. This surrender is deeply spiritual and deeply human. It honors the sacred cycles of life, birth, death, and rebirth, and invites you to release the pressure of perfectionism and the tyranny of control. When Maya let herself crumble in that quiet kitchen, she realized something profound, that falling apart was the only way she could put herself back together more real, more vibrant, more alive than before. It was the release valve she didn't know she needed, the permission slip she never gave herself. And it's the same for you. Your struggles, your wounds, your breakdowns are not detours. They're part of the path. You don't have to carry the weight of pretending or perform strength for anyone else's comfort. It's a moment you embrace your messy, raw, fractured self. You invite healing, creativity, and resilience to flood in. You stop fighting the storm and learn to dance in the rain. So here's your challenge. What if the hardest, most vulnerable moments you dread are actually the gates to your deepest growth?
Ow.
What if your breakdown is the beginning of your breakthrough?
Ow.
What story will you tell yourself today about what it means to fall apart? The world needs your realness, your cracks, your humanness, more than your polished armor. Damn you, duh. Give yourself permission not just to survive, but to truly live, to feel, and yes, to fall apart so you can rise stronger. Chapter 10. The Courage to Come Home to Yourself. It was a late autumn evening when Marcus found himself standing barefoot on the cold hardwood floor of his childhood home, the very place he had fled from years ago in a desperate search for success, validation, and freedom he thought only the outside world could offer. The house smelled faintly of old pine and worn leather, memories pressing against him like an invisible tide, moments of laughter, hurt, and silence he'd stuffed deep inside, thinking he could outrun them forever. But tonight, something shifted. The familiar ache in his chest was no longer a weight to bury under busyness. It was a signal, a call, a whisper from the part of him that never left, the part he had neglected in the chaos of achievements and distractions. Marcus realized that all the accolades, the praise, the external approval, couldn't fill the void that grew from not being fully present with himself, from ignoring the quiet longing to be known, to be seen, to be home. And here's the profound truth that many never dare to face. Coming home to yourself takes courage, the kind of courage that's messy, vulnerable, and utterly human. It means walking through the shadows of your own fears and doubts without running. It means peeling back the masks that kept you safe, but also kept you lonely. It means sitting with the parts you've hidden from the world and even from yourself, the pain, the shame, the dreams you gave up on. This courage is not about grand gestures or instant enlightenment. It's about the daily, often uncomfortable choice to show up for yourself as you are, not as you think you should be. It's saying yes to your own truth when the world demands you be someone else. It's the willingness to feel the ache of loneliness without drowning in it, to welcome your brokenness without shame, to extend compassion inward when your inner critic is loudest. Because here's the shift you didn't know you needed. The journey inward is the most radical act of rebellion in a culture that prizes distraction over depth, noise over stillness, doing over being. When you come home to yourself, you reclaim your power from the places you once thought were weaknesses. You learn that strength isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward because of it. Marcus' courage didn't erase his scars, but it changed his relationship with them from enemies to teachers. He began to trust that the quiet moments alone were not empty but fertile ground for growth. He stopped running from his own reflection and started embracing it as a map, guiding him back to his soul's deepest desires. And the beautiful paradox? The more he came home to himself, the less he needed external validation, because he discovered something more enduring and unshakable, a sense of belonging that starts within. So let me ask you, as gently and boldly as Marcus learned to ask himself, what if the place you've been searching for all along isn't somewhere out there, but inside you? What would it take to stop running and start returning? What would it mean to greet yourself with the kindness and courage you so freely offer to others? The invitation isn't easy, but it's simple. Come home. And in doing so, you don't just find yourself, you find freedom. Chapter 11. Healing isn't beautiful, it's honest. When Ava sat in that dimly lit therapist's office, tears streaming freely down her face, her perfectly curated Instagram feed flashed in her mind, a highlight reel of smiling moments, sunsets, and celebrations that masked the chaos beneath. For years, she'd believed healing had to look graceful. Instagrammable, even picturesque scenes of yoga mats, crystal bowls, and peaceful breaths. But this moment, raw and ragged, told a different story. Healing was not neat or beautiful. It was jagged, painful, and profoundly honest. It was the courage to admit what's broken, the willingness to sit in discomfort without turning away, the grit to face your shadows with open eyes instead of pretty filters. Healing doesn't come wrapped in a tidy bow or a feel-good quote. Comes in nights spent wrestling with anger, mornings waking to anxiety, afternoons unraveling long-held lies about worthiness. It's messy because it's real, and real doesn't always fit the Instagram story of progress. This honesty is the bridge from pain to freedom, the doorway that too many fear to enter because it demands vulnerability and radical self-acceptance. But here's the shift you didn't know you needed. The moment you stop trying to make your healing look pretty is the moment you begin to truly heal. You give yourself permission to be ugly, to fail, to bleed, and in that permission, you find strength far greater than any polished image. Because strength isn't about hiding wounds, it's about showing up with them, letting them teach you, and allowing yourself to be fully seen. Healing is the unfiltered mirror reflecting both your scars and your light, your breakdowns and breakthroughs. It's not a destination, but a lifelong conversation with yourself, an unfolding story where honesty is the protagonist. So, ask yourself this: what parts of your healing have you been polishing to make palatable for others, and what might happen if you just let them be real? What freedom might you unlock by trading beauty for brutal, beautiful honesty? The world craves your truth more than your perfection, and your deepest healing waits patiently for you to stop pretending and start being. Chapter 12. How to stop apologizing for your power. When Jenna first walked into the boardroom, her hands trembled not from fear of the presentation, but from years of conditioning that taught her to shrink, to soften, to dim her light so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. She caught herself apologizing before she even spoke, a nervous reflex born from countless moments when her ambition or voice had been dismissed, belittled, or met with resistance. "Sorry for interrupting," she whispered before asserting a bold idea. "Sorry if this sounds too much," she muttered before owning her success. It was a quiet surrender, an invisible leash she didn't realize was wrapped around her spirit, tethering her to someone else's version of acceptable. This is the invisible epidemic of apologizing for power, the habitual self-erasure of your strengths, gifts, and voice out of fear, habit, or misguided humility. It's a cultural echo, especially for women and marginalized voices, where power has been mistaken for threat and confidence, confused with arrogance. But here's the hard truth. Every time you apologize for your power, you give it away. You tell yourself and the world that your light is too bright, your presence too much, your dreams too big, and you start shrinking to fit a space that was never meant to hold you. Imagine if Jenna had refused to apologize, if she had spoken with unapologetic clarity, owned her space with fierce grace, and declared her worth without hesitation. What would that have done not just for her career, but for her sense of self? The shift you didn't know you needed is this: power is not a sin, it's your birthright. Power is the ability to show up as your full self, bold, tender, messy, and magnificent, without waiting for permission. Power is not about dominance or control, but about authentic presence and unapologetic self-expression. For your power, you must first recognize the roots of your apologies. Where did you learn that your ambition was too much? When did you start believing that success had a limit and that you had reached yours? What voices echoed in your mind, telling you to be quieter, smaller, less visible? Then challenge those stories. Rewrite your internal script to affirm: I have a right to be here. My voice deserves to be heard. My dreams are valid. This isn't about arrogance. It's about reclaiming dignity. It's a practice that requires courage and compassion. Sometimes you will falter and slip back into old habits. That's human. But every time you choose to stand tall instead of shrinking, you chip away at the invisible walls built to contain you. Jenna's journey wasn't about becoming a new person. It was about remembering who she had always been beneath the apologies. The fierce, brilliant woman ready to claim her power without shame. So here's your invitation. Notice how often you say sorry for simply being you. Then, choose differently. Speak your truth without the preface of apology. Own your space without shrinking. Shine without dimming your light. Because the world doesn't need smaller versions of yourself, it needs the fullness of who you are. The power you carry is a gift, not a burden. The question is, are you ready to stop apologizing and start owning your extraordinary? Chapter 13. The Quiet Revolution of Boundaries. Emily used to believe that saying no was selfish an act that risked disappointing others, fracturing relationships, or exposing her as weak and unkind. For years, she ran on empty, carrying everyone else's needs like invisible baggage, telling herself that love meant sacrifice without limits. But beneath the surface, resentment simmered quietly, like a storm she refused to name. One evening, after canceling yet another plan to care for a friend's emergency while neglecting her own, Emily caught her reflection in the mirror-tired eyes, forced smile, a spirit dimmed by obligation. That moment cracked open something deep inside, the realization that boundaries aren't barriers, but lifelines, quiet revolutions that protect your soul from burnout and reclaim your right to peace. Society often glamorizes endless giving, painting boundary setting as rude or harsh, especially to those raised to please, to nurture, to put others first. But here's the truth, no one talks about loud enough. Without boundaries, we lose ourselves. We trade our energy for approval, our joy for duty, and slowly, the self that once dreamed and dared grows faint and lost in the noise of shoulds. The shift you didn't know you needed is to see boundaries not as walls, but as gates, gentle, necessary gates that let in love without drowning you in obligation. Boundaries say to the world, I am here, I matter, and so do my needs. There. Acts of self-respect, courage, and clarity. When Emily began to practice this quiet revolution, she noticed the world didn't fall apart. In fact, her relationships deepened because honesty replaced exhaustion, presence replaced resentment. Saying no didn't make her unlovably, made her whole. The internal voice that once screamed, "You're being selfish," softened into a wise friend whispering, "You deserve care too." This revolution isn't loud or flashy, it's the steady, persistent reclaiming of your time, your energy, your heart space. It's choosing yourself in small moments, pausing before agreeing, honoring your limits, speaking your truth even when it shakes the room. It's an act of rebellion in a culture addicted to overextension and people-pleasing. A declaration that you won't disappear to make others comfortable. Imagine how life would change if you guarded your boundaries like precious soil, where your dreams grow, rather than letting them trample your worth. What if the greatest gift you give others is the gift of your fully charged, authentic self? This quiet revolution calls you to listen inwardly to the signals of fatigue, irritation, or anxiety as messengers, not enemies. It invites you to say yes to what feeds your soul and no to what depletes it. The courage to set boundaries is the courage to honor your story, your rhythm, your sacred yeses and nos. So here's the question that can transform everything. What boundary have you been afraid to stand? What freedom might follow if you finally did? Chapter 14. Your energy doesn't lie, start listening to it. It was the kind of afternoon where everything seemed slightly off, though nothing was broken. Julia was at a dinner party surrounded by laughter and chatter, yet she felt a creeping heaviness in her chest, a subtle but unmistakable signal that something was out of alignment. As she smiled and nodded, pretending to be fully present, her mind kept wandering back to the gnawing exhaustion she felt. The tightness in her shoulders and the restless buzzing beneath her skin, that quiet but persistent feeling her energy was trying to tell her something important, but for years she had learned to ignore it, to push it aside, to chalk it up to stress or overthinking. Society teaches us to listen to logic, to suppress intuition, to override our body's signals in favor of schedules, expectations, and the relentless chase for more. But what if the real truth, the shift you didn't know you needed, is that? Your energy is your truest guide, your personal compass designed not just to keep you alive, but to help you thrive. From the flutter of excitement that sparks creativity to the sinking pit of dread warning you off a toxic path, energy doesn't lie. It is the language of your authentic self speaking through the body, urging you to pay attention, to course correct, to honor your deeper needs. Julia's breakthrough came the day she stopped trying to analyze every feeling and started simply feeling, allowing herself to notice when her body relaxed. When her breath deepened, when her skin tingled with possibility, versus when it clenched with tension or anxiety. She began journaling her emotional landscape alongside her physical sensations and realized patterns emerged. Certain people, environments, and choices drained her energy, while others replenished it. This awakening wasn't about escapism or avoidance, it was radical self-honesty. She faced uncomfortable truths, relationships that no longer served her, dreams deferred too long, habits that masked pain rather than healed it. But she also discovered a wellspring of power in learning to trust herself again, in letting her energy be the first draft of her decision-making process, not the last desperate whisper after logic had failed. Neuroscience confirms that our bodies hold memories and emotions that the mind often ignores. When we listen to our energy, we access wisdom beyond conscious thought. Energy is the bridge between our internal world and external choices. It's the emotional GPS that guides us through complexity, uncertainty, and change. But listening requires practice, patience, and courage, especially in a culture that prizes rationality over feeling. It means slowing down enough to notice the subtle signals: a tight jaw, a fluttering stomach, a heaviness in the chest, and asking, "What is this telling me?" It means honoring rest without guilt, setting boundaries without shame, saying no without fear. Julia's story is not unique, but it's a beacon. It shows that when you start listening to your energy, you stop living fragmented lives and begin inhabiting your fullest self. You stop pushing against yourself and start flowing with your truth. So here's the challenge, wrapped in an invitation. How often do you check in with your energy? When was the last time you trusted it without doubting? What parts of your life are you ignoring simply because they feel uncomfortable? Your energy doesn't like speaking to you now. Will you start listening? Chapter 15. The grief you never gave yourself time to feel. Maggie sat on the edge of her unmade bed, clutching a faded photograph of a life that once was smiling faces. A dog no longer at her side, plans that dissolved like morning mistand. In that quiet moment, the walls she'd built around her heart began to tremble. For years, she had been moving forward, ticking boxes, burying memories beneath work, social media scrolls, and well-meaning distractions, convincing herself that grief was a luxury she couldn't afford, a weakness that had no place in the relentless pursuit of getting better. But grief is not a pit you fall into once and climb out of. It's a river you must learn to navigate, sometimes calm, sometimes raging, and always demanding your attention. The grief Maggie never gave herself time to feel was a silent thief, stealing energy, joy, and presence without a sound. It hid in the ache behind her smiles, in the exhaustion that no coffee could fix, in the nights when sleep eluded her and her mind replayed the what-ifs like a haunting song. This grief was not just about loss, it was about all the things she never got to say, the dreams deferred, the love left unspoken, the parts of herself sacrificed to survive. Society teaches us to move on quickly, to put on brave faces, to package pain neatly so it's easier for everyone else to handle. But in doing so, we deny ourselves the sacred process of feeling, the radical act of honoring what was real, what mattered, and what shaped us. Grief is not the enemy of healing, it is the gateway. It's the deep soil where new growth begins, the dark room where light learns to dance. When we rush past it, we carry its weight as numbness, anxiety, or silent despair. When we allow it, we let our hearts expand in ways that transform suffering into wisdom, loss into compassion, and pain into power. Maggie's journey wasn't about forgetting, it was about remembering with tenderness, learning to sit with her sorrow without judgment or haste. She found that grief needs a voice, a place to be spoken, written, or simply held in quiet solitude. And in that holding, something miraculous happens. Grief loosens its grip, making room for love and hope to seep in. The shift you didn't know you needed is this: your grief is not a sign of weakness or failure. It is the deepest proof of your humanity and capacity to love. The parts you've hidden away are begging for your attention, not your rejection. So here's the invitation: pause. Give yourself permission to feel what you've avoided. Write a letter to your lost dreams. Weep for the chapters closed too soon. Acknowledge the parts of you still waiting to be embraced. What might it look like if, instead of pushing through, you leaned into your grief? What strength could you uncover in your sorrow? What truths could you hear in the silence? The courage to grieve fully is the courage to live fully. And when you finally give grief the time it deserves, you don't just heal, you awaken. So tell me, what grief have you been rushing past? And what might happen if you stopped long enough to truly feel it? Chapter 16. Becoming the love you've been chasing. Jenna spent years searching for validation, for affection, for the kind of love that seemed to light up other people's lives. Effortlessly, but always slipped through her fingers like water. She chased relationships that promised to fill the emptiness inside, but left her feeling smaller, more fragmented, and endlessly exhausted. One rainy evening, after yet another heartbreak, she found herself sitting alone in her dimly lit apartment, the rain tapping softly against the window like a quiet reminder she could no longer ignore. The love she'd been running after wasn't hiding in someone else, it was waiting to be awakened within her. It was the love she withheld from herself, the compassion, acceptance, the fierce tenderness that could heal her wounds better than any external approval ever could. The shift Jenna didn't know she needed was this radical realization. Before she could invite love in, she had to become love. That meant looking honestly at her own fears, insecurities, and unmet needs without judgment, and offering herself the kindness she'd given to strangers but never to her own reflection. Becoming love isn't about perfection or constant happiness. It's about being present with yourself through every messy, beautiful moment, the good, the bad, the awkward, and the sacred. It's about rewriting the stories you tell yourself about worthiness, rewriting the script that says you must earn love by fixing, pleasing, or proving. Instead, it's about showing up as your whole self, scars and all, and saying, "I am enough." This internal love shifts everything. It softens the edges of loneliness, dissolves the hunger for external validation, and plants the seeds of authentic connection. Jenna's journey wasn't linear. There were days she faltered, moments when the old voice of doubt whispered cruel lies. But each time she returned to the practice of loving herself fiercely and gently, she reclaimed a little more of her power. The profound paradox is this: by becoming the love she'd been chasing, Jenna stopped running, stopped needing, and suddenly, love found her not as a desperate pursuit, but as a natural consequence of living fully and openly. This is the shift waiting for you too. What if the love you crave isn't out there but within? What if the most transformative relationship you ever cultivate is the one you have with yourself? What if becoming that love is the key to unlocking every other door? The courage to become love isn't easy. It asks you to be vulnerable, patient, and brave, but it is the most freeing, the most profound journey you will ever take. So here's your invitation. Start with one small act of kindness toward yourself today. Speak to your reflection with compassion. Hold your own hand through the hard parts, and watch how the love you become begins to light your path forward. Chapter 17. From Chaos to Clarity, Learning to Sit in the Fire. There was a night when Emma's world felt like it was unraveling. Her job was crumbling, her relationships were strained, and inside, A storm raged so fierce she thought she might shatter into 1,000 pieces and never find the fragments again. Instead of running or numbing, something in her whispered, "Stay. Sit in this fire." At first it felt unbearable. The chaos inside was a wild, roaring blaze that threatened to consume everything she'd built, everything she thought she knew. But as the minutes turned into hours, and the hours into days, Emma discovered a surprising truth. Sitting in the fire wasn't about destruction. It was about transformation. When we resist pain, deny discomfort, or distract ourselves from the hard feelings, we keep chaos swirling endlessly beneath the surface. But when we lean in, when we choose to be with the fire instead of fleeing it, the flames begin to clarify and purify. What once felt like chaos reveals itself as a crucible forging a clearer, stronger version of ourselves, one forged not in avoidance but in presence. This is no quick fix. It's a radical practice of courage and patience, learning to tolerate uncertainty, discomfort, and the raw edges of your own soul without flinching. Neuroscience calls this building emotional tolerance. Spiritual teachers call it surrender. And psychology calls it resilience. Emma realized that clarity isn't a place you find outside. It's a light you kindle inside by facing the darkness head-on. The shift you didn't know you needed is that chaos isn't your enemy. It's your teacher, your gateway. It demands you stop doing and start being, which feels like losing control, but actually rewires your brain to find new pathways forward. So often, we want answers before we're ready to feel the questions, solutions before we've embraced the struggle. The fire refines us not by erasing the pain, but by revealing what's essential beneath the ashes. Your courage, your values, your truth. Emma's fire didn't end with neat resolutions, but with a deeper trust in herself, a steadier heartbeat amidst uncertainty, and a newfound clarity that carried her beyond survival into soulful living. So here's your challenge, drawn from Emma's journey. When your world feels like it's aflame, will you run or will you sit? Will you face the heat and learn to dance with the flames, knowing that on the other side lies a clarity that no comfort zone could ever provide?
Oh, the choice.
Is yours will you meet your fire and find the light waiting in the ashes? Chapter 18. The Rise of the Embodied You. One summer afternoon, Emma found herself sitting cross-legged on a sun-warmed rock by a quiet lake.
Oh.
The gentle ripple of water matching the rhythm of her breath, but her mind was anything but calm racing. With doubts, plans, fears, and fragments of conversations she'd replayed 100 times. For years, she had lived in her head, an endless loop of thinking, analyzing, and planning, as if life was a problem to solve instead of a body to feel. Emma's story is common. We get lost in thoughts about what should be, what might be, and forget the simple yet profound truth that our body holds the key to presence, power, and peace. The embodied you is not just a poetic phrase. It's a radical reclaiming of your connection to yourself beyond your mental noise. It's the awakening to the fact that your body is not merely a vessel or an object to manage, but a living archive of your experiences, emotions, and wisdom waiting to be heard and honored. When Emma started to listen to notice the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her chest, the flutter of excitement, or the sinking feeling in her gut, realized that her body was trying to speak a language her mind had long ignored. This was her invitation to rise, not as a disembodied thinker chasing goals or validation, but as a whole, grounded human being who moves through life with awareness and intention. The shift wasn't about forcing change, but about surrendering to the intelligence already within her, the wisdom encoded in her breath, her heartbeat, her sensations. Embodiment is the practice of coming home to yourself in the fullest sense, feeling your emotions without judgment, trusting your instincts, and honoring your boundaries through your physical experience. It's where spiritual depth meets raw human reality, where dreams meet grounded action, and where true transformation begins. In this rise, Emma found something unexpected: freedom from the tyranny of overthinking, freedom from the paralysis of perfectionism, and freedom from the constant noise telling her she wasn't enough. Her body became her compass, her sanctuary, and her power source. And here's the challenge the embodied you brings. Can you slow down enough to feel? To breathe deeply into your fears, your hopes, your joy? Can you stop trying to fix or escape your experience and instead invite it in as a teacher? The rise of the embodied you is an act of courage because it demands vulnerability and presence in a world addicted to distraction and numbness. It demands that you trust what you feel more than what you think. And that trust changes everything. So here's your invitation. Stand up. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice your breath. Sense your heart beating beneath your ribs and ask yourself, what does my body want to say today? Because the embodied you is waiting to rise, not as a concept, but as your most authentic, powerful self. Chapter 19. Living unshaken in a shaking world. On a bitterly cold night in a city that never seemed to sleep. Emma stood by her apartment window, watching the chaos unfold below, sirens blaring. People rushing past, with faces marked by fear and uncertainty. Headlines flashing on her phone about the latest crisis that made the ground beneath her feel as if it might give way at any moment. The world was shaking, economies trembling, relationships fracturing. News cycles spinning faster than hearts could catch up. And yet, in the midst of this relentless storm, Emma felt something else stirring within her, quiet, stubborn flame, that refused to be extinguished. She realized that living unshaken in a shaking world wasn't about denying the turmoil or pretending the ground was solid. It was about learning how to anchor herself deeply enough to weather any storm without losing her center. This is the kind of strength that doesn't come from external control or endless preparation. It rises from an inner place of presence and surrender, where acceptance and action coexist. It's the wisdom of the oak tree that bends with the wind but doesn't break, the calm eye of the hurricane where stillness holds power, the unwavering breath in a body that refuses to be hijacked by panic. In a culture obsessed with certainty and speed, this kind of resilience can feel like an act of rebellion. Here's the shift you didn't know you needed. The world will always shake, but your soul doesn't have to. When you stop fighting the inevitable chaos and start embracing it as part of the human experience, you free yourself from the exhausting illusion of control. You begin to understand that true power is not in avoiding difficulty, but in choosing how you respond to it. Emma learned to cultivate practices that rooted her a morning ritual of quiet reflection, a daily walk to feel the earth beneath her feet, the discipline of pausing before reacting. She began to notice how her thoughts either stirred the storm or calmed the waves, and she took ownership of her mental landscape. This is not naive optimism. It's fierce clarity. It's the realization that while we cannot command the world, we can command our attention and intention. Intention is the seed of transformation. But living unshaken also means embracing vulnerability without being undone by it. It means opening your heart to the pain and uncertainty swirling around you while refusing to let it define your identity. It means saying yes to discomfort, knowing that growth is born in the tension between what is and what could be. And when you live like this, you become a Bacona, steady light in a storm that others can follow. So here's the question that will either settle in your bones or slip away with the noise. What would it look like to live your life unshaken, not because the world is safe, but because your spirit is rooted so deeply that no storm can uproot it? What old stories about yourself and your circumstances do you need to release to stand tall amidst the shaking? The shift is not about creating a perfect life free of challenges. It's about cultivating an unbreakable self that thrives because of them. Your world will shake again. But when you learn to live unshaken, you become more than a survivor. You become a force of calm, clarity, and courage. So ask yourself now, are you ready to root yourself so deeply that nothing can move you? Because that is where your true power lies. Chapter 20. The shift was never out there, it was you. It was a chilly spring morning when Emma sat alone on a park bench, watching the world wake up around her dogs stretching, joggers breathing in rhythm, sunlight catching the tips of budding leaves. She had spent years chasing what she thought would fix her: a new job, a perfect relationship, a change of city, a different routine, each one promising transformation but delivering only more restlessness. She carried a suitcase of if-onlys and when-thens, believing that somewhere out there, just beyond the horizon, was a version of herself who had it all figured out. But today, in the quiet, something softened inside her. She realized the shift she sought, the one that would finally bring peace. Joy and clarity wasn't waiting in a new address, a new title, or a new set of circumstances. It was already inside her. The truth that finally settled like a warm sunrise was that the transformation was never about changing what's outside, it was about waking up to what's inside. Emma's journey was not a quest for something new, but a return to something forgotten. Her own essence, her own power, her own light. The years she spent chasing validation, achievement, and perfection were like wandering in a dense fog, searching for a door that was hidden behind the very skin she carried. And now, after all the detours and distractions, she was home, not in a place, but in herself. This is the shift you didn't know you needed, the awakening that says you were whole all along. It's the realization that every external change you hoped for was a reflection of the inner transformation waiting to bloom. The peace you sought was never in the end goal, it was in the becoming. Psychology calls this self-actualization. Spirituality calls it awakening, and deep down, your soul has always whispered it in moments of stillness. What Emma discovered is that waiting for life to change before she could be happy was the greatest illusion and the most common trap we fall into. We think if we fix our circumstances, fix our bodies, fix our relationships, fix our finances, then we will be fixed. But the real fix comes from fixing the relationship with ourselves. That means shedding layers of self-doubt, unlearning limiting beliefs, forgiving our past mistakes, and embracing our humanity with open arms. It means owning your story, not just the parts you're proud of, but also the scars, the failures, the messy bits. Because in that ownership lies power. It means stopping the endless quest for approval outside and turning inward to find the approval that's already there. This shift is radical because it frees you from the tyranny of comparison and the exhaustion of chasing what doesn't feed your soul. When Emma finally embraced this, she didn't become perfect. She became real, and in that realness, she found freedom. The shift wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who she always was beneath the noise and the expectations. So now, here's the question for youth, the one that can change everything if you let it. What if the transformation you've been searching for isn't out there? Waiting to be earned or discovered but already lives inside you, waiting to be recognized and welcomed? What if the life you want is simply the life you create when you stop running and start showing up?
Oh.
The truth is, the shift was never a place to get to or a thing to do, it was a being to become. And that being is you, whole, enough, powerful, and ready. The only choice left is yours. Will you keep chasing shadows, or will you turn inward and step fully into your own light? The journey ends where it began, inside your own heart, and when you come home to that truth, nothing will ever be the same again.